Hi, my name is Morten, and in this video we will be looking at catalog context, URLs, and how that ties together with the CMS. We have recently created our category navigation, and we have also implemented our product listing page on the category page. So now it's time to take a little closer look at how everything is wired together. For that, we will be looking at how catalog context works, how each of the catalog items are resolved, how that ties in with the URLs, how that ties in with URL rewrites in web config, and how this is configured also in the CMS. Alright, so the first thing that I want to show you is how the stores and the catalog are resolved in Ucommerce, because that's the foundation of your web shop. Ucommerce supports multiple stores and multiple catalogs, which means that if you're running a multi-store solution, it's important to know how each of the stores are resolved. Multi-store or multi-channel solutions are basically the ability to have multiple web shops with different products coming to different store managers within the same installation. A lot of our customers are using this capability to create brand stores that has a certain look and feel based on the product that they are selling. So even though they maintain multiple content sites with different products on them, they still maintain them within the same installation. All that is possible also because of the content and commerce connected capabilities that Ucommerce offers. So let's try to take a look in the back office, how it looks like. So I have set up an additional store with an additional catalog and a category that are empty right now. We don't need any products in there to begin with, because we can just take a look at how it's wired up, and then you'll have a better understanding on how stores and catalogs are resolved. So I have two stores in my installation here right now, ucommerce.dk and ucommerce.com. If we take a closer look, we will be able to see that there's a little domain that I can configure here on my store. I'm running on localhost right now, but it could be mystore.com and mystore.dk and whatever. So each of the CMSs has the notion of a domain or a site, and that's basically an entrance to what content site that the CMS will resolve. We can take advantage of that and say we want to tie a store together with a content site, which means that a domain is equal to one store. Say that you only have one store and one catalog in Ucommerce with a lot of categories and products underneath, then Ucommerce will be clever enough to figure out that you probably want that one store and that one catalog resolved. But if you want to resolve them based on domain, because you have multiple stores for multiple domains, so per definition a multi-channel solution, then you need to configure your domains on your stores. Domains and sites are configured in the CMS. I'm sure that you already know how to do that. And this is the same concept regardless of you running Umbraco, Sitecore, or Sitefinity. So once you have the notion of that set up in the CMS, you can then configure it on the store. So here I have my store set up to be resolved to this domain. But let's try to remove the link and then go back to our second store. Go to ucommerce.com, and now I want to set the domain to my local host site here. So once this happens, then Ucommerce will reindex the stores. And just for good measure, let's try to take a look at the catalogs that I have configured on each of the stores. So instead of resolving ucommerce.dk, I will now be resolving ucommerce.com instead. So here for ucommerce.com, I have another catalog, which has a single category called A category. This is the store that I'm expecting to be resolving right now. And if we go back to ucommerce.dk, where I just changed the host name to not have any, then we have Ucommerce shared software and support. So what happens right now when I click on home is that Ucommerce picks up on the indication that this domain was resolved. We will ask the CMS based on the implementations that we have, dear CMS, what is the domain that I'm looking at right now? and then I will find a store based on that. If I have no domains configured and we have multiple stores, then you better just pray that it's the right store that you want, because Ucommerce will just resolve the first one it can find. So running multiple stores certainly require you to have multiple domains as well. In this case, I now resolved my other store and my other catalog, which means that I now see a category, and my category is of course empty. Good. So that's how stores are resolved. Catalogs is a little different story, and the same goes for categories and for products. And that's resolved based on context parameters, which are implemented as URL rewrites in the system. The reason for this is that the CMS and Ucommerce will both have the responsibility of resolving what we're looking at right now. And the only thing that we have available to do so is, at least for classic MVC architecture, is the URL. And what we have up here is a URL that are not very CMS friendly. In fact, I don't have a page that is called a category under this path here. For this to work, we have shipped Ucommerce on the CMS on top of URL rewrites, and it's actually the URL rewrites that serves what we're looking at right now. So this URL will actually be translated into a page that the CMS understands, and then Ucommerce will be able to resolve the context based on that. That is, what is the catalog we're looking at? In this case, it's another catalog. And it's also what is the category we're looking at, or if we're looking at a product, then what is the product we're looking at. All that is done via the URL rewrites. So let's take a closer look at that. First, we can see here for my category page that I have a category URL. We determine that with URL rewrites, and that is being evaluated based on regular expressions. And this URL here is actually rewritten to something that the CMS understands and that Ucommerce also understands. So let's try to give an example of how that would work. So another catalog /c/a category, we can identify this URL with regular expressions and say every time I match something called /c/ and then a dynamic content, that means we have a catalog name and a category name on both sides of this C here. So I know that this is a category page, and we can then rewrite that into what the CMS understands. Let's take a look in web config. So here I have my web config. I'm running Umbraco in this case, but it's the same for Sitecore and Sitefinity as well, that URLs are put on top of this. So here we can actually see the category page that I was looking at right now. And without going into details about these regular expressions, what we can see is that if I match this URL with my regular expression, then I should rewrite into a page called catalog.aspx, where I put query string parameters after the URL, which means that the CMS will actually understand the path of my website, and Ucommerce will understand the query string parameters. When we build it up, the catalog and category navigation and the category page, we were using the interface called iCatalog context, and the implementation of the iCatalog context looks for what store we're looking at based on the domains, and then it will look on the query string parameters for the catalog, for the category, and for the product. And we can see that for all types of pages, we have a corresponding rewrite rule for that. So a category page is called /c/something, whereas a product rewrite is called /p/something. So for the category page, catalog.aspx will be resolved in the CMS, and I have set that up in the CMS. Let's take a quick look at that under content. In this case, it's Umbraco, but as I said, it's the same in all CMSs, that you need a page that are being resolved for this particular URL. So you can see the link for this page is actually /catalog with or without ASPX on it. In this case, Umbraco understands both. So that means that when I resolve this URL, if I just click on the link, I will get an exception because I could not find what I'm looking at because the context has not been set up properly. So we will be able to see that I fair enough, I find my category controller because that's the controller that the CMS resolved based on the URL up here, but we did not set up the context for what we're looking at. But I could actually do this manually. So let's try to do that. To set up the context, since my page has been resolved by the CMS, but I need my query string parameters, I need to set up what is the catalog. And the catalog is a catalog, and my category is a category. So if I set this up, Ucommerce will now automatically figure out what we're looking at based on the query string parameters. Notice that when we build it up, the URLs, we actually don't get this URL fashion here. It's not very SEO friendly. In fact, we got the proper URL friendly way with the names in it. So the query string parameters here are just internally used by Ucommerce. You could use them if you want to like this, but you probably won't. So based on this, how are the catalog and the category resolved? Well, it's actually based on the multilingual values that you set up in the display names on both the catalogs and on the categories. Remember that Ucommerce are both a multi-channel solution, but it's also the ability to have multiple languages for your web shops. So if you're running multiple languages in the CMS, so are you in Ucommerce. The way that that's being handled is that the display name on both the catalogs and the categories and the products are matched as the item in the catalog context, thus translating the query strings into a display name. So the catalog is expected to be called a catalog in the display name, whereas the category is supposed to be called a category. But let's try to change that. And the way that we do that is, for example, by going to the category and say my category here is actually named Morten. So now my category was saved in the index, and if I refresh my page, I will now get an exception because I could not find the current category anymore. This is simply a null reference now. So instead, I will now change my category up here to be Morten, and again, my category will be resolved. And this goes for both the catalog, for the category, and for the product pages. It's the display name that determines what we're looking at. So if we go back again, we will see Morten, and let's take a look at the actual URL that was resolved. It's another catalog /c/Morten, rewritten into the URL that we saw before. Makes Umbraco and whatever other CMS we're running on understand the actual content page, and that resolves to the actual controller that we are using, and then Ucommerce will be able to set up the context based on this. This notion here of a single page that resolves all our catalog items are called data-driven pages, which means that it's the page will be resolved based on the URL, and in the URL we will have the context on what we're looking at right now. You will actually also be able to tie a page in the CMS together with a category or a product if you, for example, configure a Ucommerce picker inside the CMS to resolve what item you want on there, which means that you would have a dedicated page per item in your CMS. You're probably not interested in that if you're running a large scale setup. And if you're doing that, you probably want to stick with the data-driven pages here, where you just have a single page per catalog item type. So a dedicated category page, a dedicated product page. And then if you want to have different views or templates based on the product type you're watching, for example, you may want to present a gift card in a different way than you would present a shirt or a shoe. In that case, you can differentiate the template that are being used inside your controller. So a controller would, for example, render a template based on the definition of the product. That could be one example. So that is basically how catalog context works in Ucommerce. When you resolve the interface, let's take a look at it on the category controller here. We have catalog context injected from the IOC context, and it's this implementation here of catalog context that determines what we're looking at based on the query string parameters. There's a lot of examples where you want to change the behavior of this catalog context. For example, if you want to redirect users to certain products or categories or catalogs, then you can create your own special implementation of the catalog context and resolve it based on your business logic. But more about extensibility in a later Masterclass video. And that's how catalog context works. And that also means that when I use my URL service here, what I'm actually building up is the URL that we also did here in the category navigation controller, where we say I want to have a URL for this catalog and for this category here. And that's how catalog context and URLs work in Ucommerce. To recap very quickly, the CMS needs to know what we're looking at. That's based on the URL and what you set up in your content side. Ucommerce needs to know what we're looking at, and that's implemented as query string parameters in the URL. We probably don't want to have an ugly looking URL that we saw before with the query string parameters surfaced in the URL. To avoid that situation, we use URL rewrites that are put inside webconfig. We ship with them default out of the box here, and you can change them so they look more or less how you would want them to look like, and then you can keep going with those URLs instead. Once you have all this in place, you will now be able to use the catalog context by injecting it into your controllers from the IOC container of Ucommerce. Resolve catalog context and you're good to go. Stores and catalogs are resolved based on the domain that you set up in the CMS, and thus you have the ability to create a multi-channel functionality as well. And that's all for the catalog context and URLs in this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.